Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jen Eckerly. I'm the Executive Director of the Ocean Protection Council. I also serve as Deputy Secretary for Oceans and Coast for the California Natural Resources Agency. And we are here today to provide some information about a funding solicitation to help advance 30 by 30 in coastal waters. So thank you all for being here today. We will record this and post on our website, so folks who weren't able to join us can get this information following the webinar. So with that, I am happy to turn it over to Mike Escrow, who can introduce himself, and then we'll be leading this webinar. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for your interest in this funding opportunity and your interest in 30 by 30. I'm Mike Escrow. I lead our biodiversity and tribal affairs work at OPC, and that includes our work on 30 by 30. So I've got about maybe 5-ish minutes of slides. And I just see we also have Stacy Lewis, who hopped on from the OPC team. So Stacy, you want to introduce yourself as well? Stacy, you're muted. We cannot hear you. Maybe Stacy cannot hear us. Okay, well, we'll roll forward and maybe Stacy can introduce herself.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mike.
No worries.
I was not able to unmute until someone allowed me to, so thanks. I'm Stacy Lewis. I'm the Marine Protected Area Network Program Manager at OPC, and have been had the pleasure to work with Mike and Jen on 30 by 30 over the last few months. Thanks.
Thanks for being here, Stacy. Okay, so let's just start by grounding ourselves in California's 30 by 30 goals. So back in 2020, 5 years ago, Governor Newsom issued an executive order committing our state to conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030, which we know as the 30 by 30 target. And in 2022, California released this Pathways to 30 by 30 document, which really defines what we mean by a 30 by 30 conservation area and establishes 10 pathways for achieving 30 by 30. And just earlier this month, OPC adopted a roadmap for how we're going to achieve 30 by 30 in coastal waters. 30 by 30 is a little bit trickier in the ocean than it is on land because the ocean's a public trust resource and no one owns the ocean. So we went through a really extensive science-informed, stakeholder and community-driven process, tribal consultation to really hone in on what we mean by conservation in coastal waters for the purposes of 30 by 30 and what our next steps are going to be over the next 5 years of the 30 by 30 initiative. So the adoption of the roadmap by our council earlier this month brought us to 21.9% of coastal waters conserved. That includes our state's Marine Protected Area Network, which covers about 16% of coastal waters. That's really the foundation of 30 by 30. But we are also broadening our view of what a 30 by 30 conservation area can mean in coastal waters to include things like tribally stewarded areas, also areas that might not be formal marine protected areas, but are still managed in ways that achieve biodiversity benefits. So we're at 21.9% of coastal waters conserved right now. That means we've got an additional just about 275,000 acres to conserve over the next 5 years. And the roadmap really clearly lays out our main next steps for accomplishing that. The goal of this solicitation is really to drive forward on all of those priorities that are listed in the roadmap for how we're going to get to 30%, and specifically enhancing coastal and marine biodiversity conservation, strengthening protections in existing 30 by 30 conservation areas, and supporting the identification of potential new 30 by 30 conservation areas, again, in alignment with that roadmap that was adopted earlier this month. But in addition to kind of those policy and science considerations, we're really interested in supporting on-the-ground direct restoration and stewardship action through this RFP, on-the-ground environmental stewardship activities, and then, of course, supporting stewardship of coastal and marine ecosystems by local communities and also, importantly, California Native American tribes. So those are the broad priorities for this solicitation. There's $10 million total that's available through this solicitation, and there are 3 separate tracks, so 3 separate kind of topical areas that we're interested in supporting with this funding. So the first we're calling action-oriented science. There's $3 million available for this track. And we're allowing projects of up to 2 years, although just given the urgency of what we're trying to accomplish, 1-year projects for this are highly encouraged. And these are projects that are going to help us address key knowledge gaps related to 30 by 30. In a second, when we're in more of the discussion portion, I'll drop some key links into the chat, and one of those will be Appendix E to Pathways to 30 by 30. That's a document that specifically addresses science needs related to 30 by 30 and breaks them down different things like threats to biodiversity, monitoring and evaluation, things like that. And so highly encourage folks that are interested in this track to take a look at that appendix. But just some examples, scientific recommendations for strengthening area-based protections, vulnerability assessments, especially in relation to climate change, modeling to inform conservation priorities, and identification of, again, ways to strengthen protection or potential new protections would all be examples of priorities, priority science projects we're looking to support through this track. Next is track 2, accelerating environmental restoration and stewardship. So there's 4 million available for this track or this topical area, and we're allowing projects of up to 2 years for this track. And so this track is really based on an individual pathway in Pathways to 30 by 30, Pathway 6, which is all about accelerating restoration and stewardship, and really recognizes that achieving 30 by 30 is not just about designating areas as conservation areas on a map, but really about investing in the long-term stewardship of those areas and also the broader ecosystems of which those areas are a part. So this is really focused on, again, those on-the-ground restoration and stewardship activities. We're focused here on degraded or threatened or vulnerable habitats. Although, other types of stewardship that help to maintain intact habitats would, of course, be welcome as well. And some examples would be, habitats and ecosystems like kelp forests, eelgrass, but also projects that are going to help with sea level rise resilience, improve water quality, manage invasive species, and things like that. Much more detail and example priorities for each of these tracks is available in the full solicitation, which you guys have probably already checked out, but I'll put in the chat as well. Just want to sort of name a few examples to kind of get some thoughts going here. And then finally, we have our third track, which is a $4 million set aside specifically for tribal projects. So we're calling this Revitalizing Tribally Led Stewardship. Again, 2-year projects maximum. So these are all going to be pretty accelerated timeframe type projects, but this is really focused on restoring and reconnecting tribes to the coast and ocean. So examples would include ancestral land return, supporting tribally led research or monitoring or restoration projects that help to support the integration or incorporation of traditional knowledge for the benefit of tribal stewardship areas, also supporting the development and potential establishment of indigenous marine stewardship areas, which is a new concept for California that's outlined in Pathways, essentially envisioned as areas that tribes would set aside as stewardship areas that would also count for 30 by 30. So those are our 3 tracks. We can talk more about them during discussion, but to kind of briefly touch on some logistics here, eligibility. So eligible applicants include local, state, federal agencies, private universities, nonprofit organizations, private entities, or California Native American tribes. And tribes includes both federally recognized tribes as well as nonprofit organizations that would be applying on behalf of a non-federally recognized tribe in California. In terms of timeline, the solicitation went out last week. We are at June 30th. This is our informational webinar, so this is where we are in the timeline. In about a week, we'll also be holding office hours, so that'll be similar to this webinar, but a little bit less structured, a little bit less formal. Just an opportunity for you to ask OPC staff any questions you might have as you're developing letters of intent. Initial letters of intent, which are pretty short and sweet, there's a template on our website, are due on July 18th, so just a little bit over 2 weeks from now. And we're going to spend just about a month reviewing those letters of intent, and I'll talk more about that review process in just a second. We will let applicants who submit LOIs know on August 13th whether or not they're invited to submit full proposals. And applicants will have just a little bit over a month to more fully develop their letter of interest or letter of intent into a full proposal. We will take about 2 months to review those full proposals. And again, I'll touch more on review process in just a second, with the intention of bringing selected projects to our council for their consideration and potential approval at our December 9th council meeting. And then we would aim to start projects, actually have people working in the lab, in the water, somewhere between January, March of 2026. As soon as possible, essentially, after our council hopefully approves the suite of selected projects, allowing a little bit of turnaround time for OPC to execute grants. That is our timeline. And in terms of our review process, so we have this two-phase review process. So the first is the letter of intent. Again, the template for the letter of intent is going to be on our website, and I'll put that information in the chat as well. But these are very brief. These are intended to just summarize the project and desired outcomes. We're reviewing those really for eligibility of applicants, general alignment with the solicitation priorities, and completeness. And so we anticipate inviting, we haven't thought, we don't have like a set percentage or anything like that, but as long as applicants have a complete application or complete letter of intent that the project is aligned with the solicitation priorities and the applicant is eligible, we will invite that applicant to submit a full proposal. And full proposals is really where we're going to be looking more for that detailed scope of work, a project budget, a project timeline and schedule. And these will be subject to a more rigorous and in-depth review process where there's going to be a review committee composed of OPC staff and potentially also external experts as needed, scoring proposals against a detailed rubric that's available in the solicitation. So that rubric really should give you an idea of exactly what we're looking for in these full proposals. We're trying to be as transparent as possible about what we're looking for in our evaluation criteria. So how can you stay informed? First of all, I'm really glad that everyone is here today to hear more about this opportunity and our process. Again, welcome you to attend those office hours on July 9th for a little bit more of an informal conversation and just to chat things through. Letters of intent are due by July 18th to that Coastal Waters 30 by 30 email. This is all, again, on our website, step-by-step instructions for how to submit. But please do submit those on time by July 18th. This is funded through Proposition 68, and so please do also check our Prop 68 website regularly. We do update with additional funding opportunities and more information on solicitations there as well. And of course, subscribe to our listserv, where you can hear more news about OPC regularly and hear about more funding opportunities and things like that. And please always don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. There's that 30 by 30 Coastal Waters email there, which is kind of our general 30 by 30 email address. I'll also put my email address in the chat as well, so folks can reach out directly to me if desired. And I will end it there. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can all see each other. See, we've got, wow, 124 participants. That's awesome. We had like 30 when we started, so that's great. We got some more folks on board. I will try to field questions from the chat as well. But
Mike, I've got the chat handled.
Awesome. Okay, then maybe folks can either just jump in or raise hands, and would be happy to just have a bit more of an informal discussion.
Yeah, I think folks need to actually raise their hands so that we can unmute them.
Unmute them? Okay, yep. Got it.
So if anyone has questions, just raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you. All right, so I'm going to unmute Elizabeth. Let's see if I can do this.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, go ahead. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I'm in a busy bustling restaurant right now, but I had to jump on anyway. Yeah, my name is Elizabeth Cotton, executive director of a nonprofit called Black Tech Link. One of the questions that I had, and as far as environmental stewardship goes, it's like would workforce development like activities like be supported under this grant?
All right, I'm gonna put Elizabeth back on mute. Mike, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think yes, but in the LOI, it would be helpful to understand kind of how that workforce development is going to contribute to concrete biodiversity benefits. So I wouldn't say no. I would just say I think it's really important to make that connection clear in your LOI. Let's see. I'm just going to go in order on my screen. So we just heard from Elizabeth. Nastasia? I think, let's see, hang on. I need to unmute you. I need to ask you to unmute. There we go.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nastasia. I'm with Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I have two questions. Do you know about how many awards per track you plan to award? And related, is there a maximum amount of award money that can be requested for one project?
Yeah, we do have funding ranges in the solicitation. I can look those up in just a second. I think we would probably end up, if I'm remembering the math right, between 3 and 4, maybe up to 5 awards per track. But that also does depend on kind of our evaluation of the full proposals as well. And if there is, compelling argument to award something that's a little bit under the minimum of the range or a little bit over the maximum, we would be open to considering that.
Okay, and sort of related as a follow-up, if we are wanting to sort of supplement or grow an additional small grant, would that be favorably looked on? Like we say we have some money to do a little bit of work, but it would, we could really make it better by expanding it with this award. Is that something that you would consider as well?
100%. Yeah, there's a line item in the rubric for leveraged or match funding, and it's not required, but it certainly is something that we encourage and like to see.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Shauna. You should be able to unmute.
Hello, this is Shauna. I'm with the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach. I was wondering if you are prioritizing existing projects or new ones, and also kind of similar to the previous question of projects that already have funding, particularly those that might have seen a drop off due to federal and NOAA funding that will not be continuing after probably this year. Um, do you have any sort of preference there or any way to clarify if that's already existing?
Yeah, no preference between new projects or kind of expansion of existing projects. I think again, as long as the case can be made that this is aligned with the priorities of the solicitation, we'd entertain either of those or consider either of those equally. And yeah, like I was saying to Nastasia, I think that that line item in the rubric about leveraged or matched funding is a great place to point out any funding that you have on board that might contribute to the project. Thank you. Okay, let's go to Bobby.
Thanks, Mike. Bobby from Pew Charitable Trusts. Thank you, Mike and Stacy and Jen for this. My question, I think in like the draft issuance of this, it talked about how OPC reserves the right to like basically encourage collaboration between one or more proposals. And I wanted to know, I know it's TBD, but like how you see that playing out. Like would that potentially occur after the LOI moment for you to say like, oh, group X and Y, you should really work together? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that is kind of more for us to help in terms of efficiency and really making sure that we get the biggest bang for buck in terms of our funding is that, if we get several proposals that propose to do something similar or work in similar area or maybe work with similar partners that, yeah, I think it would be at that LOI stage, we might bring those groups together and say, hey, have you considered working together, basically? Yeah. Not required, but it's just something that we are going to be keeping an eye out for. Thanks, Bobby. Okay, let's go to Courtney.
Hi, my name is Courtney. I'm with the Orange County Coastkeeper. And my question was if one organization can apply for two separate tracks. for two separate projects?
Yeah, I might look to Jen for just a second. I don't see any reason why not.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. Okay, moving to Camille.
Yep. Hi, thanks. Yeah, hi, this is Camille Antonori from Berkeley. I was curious about projects that I have a couple of questions. For example, for a restoration project that occurs, offshore that might still be considered within the jurisdiction of a local, town. How does the jurisdictional breakdown work? And let's say, if just for an example, off the shoreline from Albany Beach or something, if there was a project, would it have to require BCDC approval plus State Lands Commission approval, and in addition to say the City of Albany approval? I'm wondering how that gets sorted out for these types of projects. And then my second question is also for tracks 1 and 2, does the minimum have to be 200,000 or can it be less?
Yeah, so in response to your first question, it really is on the applicant to ensure they have all the proper permitting before starting the project, or if the permits haven't been secured already, that the applicant has the capacity and that it's likely that those permits will be granted. So that's something that's going to be included in the LOI and the full proposal, as well as, has the applicant done their due diligence on necessary permitting, especially for those restoration projects, right? In terms of the range, yeah, again, if there's a compelling argument to be made for a project that's below the minimum of the suggested range in the solicitation or above the maximum, we're definitely open to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Camille. Okay, let's go to Alex.
Hey, thanks for this opportunity. Appreciate the webinar and the discussion so far. Alex Size, I'm the Conservation Director for Southern California for the Trust for Public Land. This question was actually posed in the chat, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you guys define, kind of the geographical stretch of this program? And more specifically, when I hear things about, species conservation, restoration, water quality, makes me think of a project we have in Ventura, which has significant critical habitat for steelhead, and the restoration of that creek in particular would have, I would say, also significant water quality benefits. But it's a couple miles away from the coast, and so I'm wondering if that type of project would be eligible. It also has a major nexus with the local indigenous tribe. And so just trying to see if that's too far away from the coast, if there's a coastal nexus that we could discuss during the open hours for discussion, or if we should just apply and see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, short answer, I think, is that we would definitely consider a project like that. I will say that this is a really broad solicitation, and so we're looking at projects statewide, right? Across the state, we're looking at projects that could take place in coastal or marine habitats. We're looking, but in the coastal region, right? I think a couple miles is reasonable because we're really interested in projects that benefit ecosystems at that land-sea interface, and especially species that span those boundaries. But I think that would be kind of on a case-by-case basis, probably, that we would evaluate that. So if something's work proposed 10 miles inland might be a little bit harder to justify a coastal biodiversity benefit. I will also say that just to clear up any confusion, that because this is a broad solicitation, this is not just restoration and stewardship work. We're not only looking for things taking place in existing 30 by 30 conservation areas. We're very open to work outside of those areas too, because we see the biodiversity benefits of working across the state.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Alex.
And Alex, I purposefully did not answer that in the chat because I felt like it merited the discussion. So thanks for raising it.
No worries. Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it.
Jen, anything you'd add on to that one? That's an important one.
No, I think that
Okay.
was great.
Good. Let's go to Adina.
Yes, hi. Thanks for coordinating this. I have a couple of questions, and one is very broad. Is there a emphasis more on acquisition and actual restoration shovel-ready projects, or would research to inform restoration be also suitable for this solicitation? And if we're talking about research, things like monitoring and maintenance of existing projects, in contrast to just, starting new projects, is that, if you can expand on that a little bit? And my second question is like a more general decision-making tool to inform restoration. Would that fall into any of these categories? Thank you.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Adina. Good questions. I would say that for tracks 2 and 3, well, certainly for track 2, I think track 3, because it's a tribal set aside, there's maybe a little bit more flexibility. But for track 2, that's really where those shovel-ready on the ground projects would fit. Research to inform restoration or research to inform decision making sounds to me a bit more like a track 1 proposal, that action oriented science track. And I would say for something like modeling to inform decision making, it would just have to be really clear how the outcomes would directly connect to management actions that the state could take to advance 30 by 30, right? So how would the modeling outcomes help us strengthen protections in existing 30 by 30 areas, or identify new 30 by 30 areas, or help prioritize habitats for restoration, things like that. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Thank you. All right, let's go to Nathan.
Hey, Michael, thank you. Quick question. I have a cool project that I'm really excited about, and I'm more so looking for location. It's like a land to sea restoration, but I have a lot of good relationships with the Port of San Diego and Long Beach and Los Angeles. My question is, are you more so preferring for restoration projects for kind of new untouched areas, or for the port locations that probably historically have been focused on for a while, but there are still areas that need work? Is there a preference between each, or like, because I would be open to identifying new locations, and there's even the idea of like you could do like eelgrass moving up into the uplands, and then even focusing on like headwaters that go up into like creekways, and there's a lot of really cool things that we could do. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I would not say that we have a preference between sort of new areas versus, it sounds like you're just talking about areas where sort of previous work has been done.
Either previous work or kind of alongside of it, yeah. And
Yeah,
it would be cool if there was like brand new areas we could identify. But I know that the ports have some good locations that still need work done.
I do not think that we would have a preference. Yeah, again, as long as that kind of clear biodiversity benefit could be articulated, I think either would be great for an LOI.
Cool. Right on. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Let's go to Anne.
Oh, hey. So my question, first of all, the previous questions were really helpful. So braid theory, we're advisory with a lot of early stage tech startups. So what we really focus on is how we can have tech enabled solutions to scale across numerous projects. Is there a way that weight can be given to opportunities in this track 2 that can support numerous projects rather than focusing on one restoration projects? I'm talking about like biodiversity, let's just call them biobombs of micro reef activities, for example, where you can scale opportunities across multiple locations. Or do we have to sort of pick one?
I think let me see if I'm understanding your question. So are you asking if kind of funding to support like research and development into scalable?
No, it's actually deployment of tech that can enable improved biodiversity in many projects. So do we have to focus within a project, or can we show that this is tech?
It's like a deployment of a broadly applicable tool. Got
Correct.
Yeah, a little hard for me to answer without seeing sort of a more information on the project, but I do think that would be eligible. Yeah, and certainly worth a letter of intent.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Ann.
Should we also indicate on the LOIs that we would be interested in collaborating with others?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Paula. Oh, sorry, Paula. I need to ask you. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted.
So my question is a little complicated because the project I'm interested does take place across borders. It's focused on the Southern California, Northern Baja California area. And so although the project focus definitely touches on Southern California, there is cross-border collaboration, which of course would obviously benefit, marine ecosystems in the Southern California Bight. But I'm curious if there are restrictions around that, if we would have to focus on only the California portion, or if there would be a possibility for those funds to also benefit perhaps partners that are helping on both ends. But yeah, I know it can be a little tricky with state funding.
Yeah, I might look to Jen for that one. I do feel like that's something we could consider, but I haven't really run into that particular question before.
I think it does get tricky with state funding, so we would probably want to dig into the details of the project and the partners and how the funding would be allocated to be able to give you a better answer.
Okay, I could follow up via email. And if the letter of intent needs to be focused mainly on the portion that takes place north of the border, I mean that can also be done. I'm just curious if by association or if there's a collaborative portion that happens south of the border, if that would complicate funds or anything like that.
Might be helpful in your LOI to really clearly articulate the benefit to California. And then that's something we could also dig into details in office hours as well if you're interested in kind of talking through the specifics a bit more.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, Paula. Let's go to Edward.
Yes, hi, thank you. We have a couple things we're thinking about. I'm with Living Ocean Foundation, and we're interested in action-oriented stuff. But we see a need for an adaptive management plan. And I think the solicitation said that planning was not part of this, but we're thinking adaptive management plan is implementation. So what are your thoughts on that, taking that step with this solicitation?
Yeah, I would not say off the bat that it would not be eligible. I think it's kind of similar to the question about research to inform restoration. I think the development of a management plan would be something we'd consider, but the specific, again, coming back to kind of a common theme here, that the specific on the ground benefits would need to be really clear.
Great. Yes. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Edward. Okay, we'll go to Michaela.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for hosting. My name is Michaela. I'm a PhD candidate down at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I'm interested in a project that looks at cryptic populations of humpback whales along the coast of California, specifically in the offshore wind lease area. We think that there's two overlapping populations in that region that use the habitat potentially differently. I'm wondering, I guess since that's not protected land, it's now designated as this lease area, if that would be of interest. Also, it's bordering several national marine sanctuaries. So I'm wondering if research in the lease area would be of interest to this solicitation.
I'll jump in to say those lease areas are in federal waters. So this funding is specific for activities in state waters.
Thank you.
Michaela, stay tuned because we are actively working on kind of pulling together comprehensive environmental monitoring guidance for offshore wind and really trying to identify top priorities. And we have some funding to support that work. So if you're not on our listserv, make sure you get on there so you can keep track of our upcoming offshore wind efforts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Michaela. Let's go to Paula.
Apologies, I didn't put my hand down from the last question.
Got it. Okay, wasn't sure. Thank you. I don't see any additional hands. Other folks have questions? While we're waiting, I can
I'm
put some
still
links in the chat
making my
here.
way through the chat. There is a question here from Natalie about whether track one can fund policy driven work or does it need to be primarily research focused? And when I asked for a little more clarity, she said, for example, informing how state policies could be strengthened to improve biodiversity outcomes and or advocating for implementation of existing policies like overlaying MPAs with water quality protections.
Let me see if I can. Okay. Yeah, that sounds solidly like track one to me. I would say the advocacy piece maybe would be interested in drilling into a little bit more. Like, is that sort of just like policy advocacy, or are you like thinking about actual like scientific products that would kind of help maybe better align MPAs and water quality protection? We could either talk about that now or in office hours, or happy to review an LOI for this one. I don't hear Natalie jumping in, so maybe we'll table that or take that discussion offline. Let's go to Richard. Hey, Richard.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Doing great. Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Hopefully you've been doing some diving lately. I got a kind of a specific question. We have a project that what we've been doing is air monitoring around the Morro Bay estuary and giving real-time CO2 data to the Cal Poly Carbon Lab. And what our next phase is we would like to get a co-locating air monitor at the harbor, and those are in about the $50,000 range. Is this something that maybe we could apply for through the 30/30 program?
Potentially, although I think it would be really helpful to understand kind of how that and this is good that you brought this up because I think this is something that's come up with water quality as well. So this is not a solicitation intended to fund just monitoring on its own, although we definitely understand the importance of monitoring and we invest in a lot of different long-term monitoring programs. But for this solicitation, it's really more about that science to inform decision making or actual on the ground restoration and stewardship. So if the air quality monitoring kind of has an outcome that will improve on the ground biodiversity, then it's definitely something we'd consider. If it's more just investment in equipment for monitoring, it's not the best fit for the solicitation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, let's go to Brooke.
Hi, thanks so much. This is super helpful. I'm Brooke. I'm a new assistant professor at Stanford at Hopkins Marine Station. And I feel like the project I'm envisioning is sort of directly in between track one and two. And I'm wondering how to differentiate. It sounds like track two is pretty much just on the ground restoration, but if you're identifying a key knowledge gap that's directly supporting on the ground restoration, would you still see it as track one? Yeah, I guess sort of where is the line between track one and track two?
Yeah, good question. I think track two is really intended to be more on the ground in the water, versus track one is kind of more the theoretical, or research track. It's again maybe a little bit hard. I don't want to like push you into one category or another without seeing an LOI, but I could, sounds like from what you're describing, I could see arguments for either. And so it is possible on the LOI to say like you're interested in track one or two, just depending on sort of where, we think it fits better. You can put down interest in multiple tracks on the LOI. So it sounds to me, probably just hearing what you're saying, more like track one, but you can indicate interest in both tracks as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, maybe I'll reach out to further look at that, but I appreciate it.
For sure. Thanks, Brooke. Natalie, I see your hand up.
This is Natalie from CCKA. Thanks for already answering part of my question before about informing state policy. I was thinking more of sort of straight up policy advocacy, not a specific like scientific output. So advocating for a state policy to be improved for better biodiversity outcomes, or working with somebody like a regional water board to implement water quality protections in an MPA, let's say. Is that type of work eligible, or is that type of advocacy just sort of off the table?
Got it. Well, advocacy is off the table for sure. Like the policy, the policy advocacy that you're describing, I could potentially see like maybe track 2 if there was a clear like the goal was to work closely with the water board to improve water quality in a specific MPA, for example, that could be eligible. But yeah, if it's just advocacy, then unfortunately, no, that's not something we can support through this solicitation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Adina.
So since people are asking about specific projects, I've got a similar question. So would a project that collects data to inform baseline conditions pre-restoration, so there's a general plan to restore an area, it's in the process of fundraising and getting permits, but we want to get the baseline to kind of evaluate the success of the restoration. So looking at water quality, soil carbon, and nutrient storage, greenhouse gas emissions to set the baseline before, so there is something we can assess the success of the program.
Got it. Certainly eligible and would be considered. I would say that we are generally looking to encourage and prioritize action, on the ground action, right? And so I think it might be that one might be a little bit less competitive than projects that we're going to actually undertake restoration, but I wouldn't want to say it's not eligible.
But would it be research, or it's track 1 or track 2, something like that? I would think
that,
1.
That I would consider research.
Okay, thanks.
And Mike, I see a question in the chat from Jenny Dugan that's basically, I think, on the same theme, right? So these pre-assessments for kind of understanding the suitability of restoration, or kind of the success and efficacy, I think they would fit under track 1, but I would reiterate what you just said, that we're really looking to prioritize kind of that on the ground, shovel ready restoration.
Yep.
And
Natalie,
I'm doing my best to answer questions in the chat, but I'm sure that I've missed some.
See. I do see go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Jenny asked another question about what level of feedback do we anticipate will be provided on the LOIs invited for full proposals to help guide or tailor the full proposals. I think that's a great question. I think we're not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that until we see kind of the types of information we get back. Typically in other grant programs that we run, there will be can often be questions asking for more specificity on the project details, on the budget details, on the partners, on whether or not there was consultation or co-development with local tribes or community members. So those are the types of things that often come up when we're trying to provide feedback on an LOI for a full proposal.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. And thanks, Jenny. Great question. I see Brian. Brian, looks like you're off mute, so please jump in.
Could you please let us know the number of LOIs that get accepted in each track? That will help applicants plan.
We don't
You
have
mean,
a set amount of LOIs.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we have a
Oh,
kind of
got it.
we have a total amount of funding per track and general a minimum and maximums for each project, but we're really going to need to see what those LOIs look like before we know how many we'll invite for a full proposal.
To clarify, I'm referring to after you've issued the acceptance letters, just post the number of accepted LOIs that you've got in each track. That those statistics will help applicants this round and in the future.
Yeah, Brian, that's something that we typically include in our final, once we've made final awards, we talk about number of LOIs that were received, a number of full proposals that were received, number of proposals funded, things like that. So all those statistics will be available when we present to our council in December. Thanks for your question. Let's go to Sarah. Oops. I
Hi.
think I muted you, Sarah. There you are.
Oh, there I am. Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm on the board for a nonprofit called Sea Dreamers. Our president is going to be swimming the entire coast of California next summer, and it will be documented. And each county we have different ambassadors. For track two, could you maybe double click on the stewardship element that you'd like to be seen in these applicants?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's really cool. I think I would have to see an LOI to kind of really understand what the clear biodiversity benefit of that kind of sounds like, more like an outreach and engagement project. So, again, this is really about biodiversity conservation and strengthening protections and really investing in on the ground work. So if a clear connection can be made about how that outreach is going to improve local stewardship, then definitely something that we would consider. I think when we say stewardship for the purposes of track two, it's very much as defined in pathways to 30 by 30, right? In that pathway 6 about environmental stewardship, environmental restoration to actually improve conditions on the ground in those degraded or threatened ecosystems. Does that
Thank
help?
you.
So a little bit of a case by case, but I hope
Yeah, no,
that's
that makes sense. I really appreciate it.
cool.
And you should keep
Thanks.
us posted on that because that
Yeah.
sounds really cool, and we can elevate in other ways.
Thank you. Catherine Breed, follow her on Instagram. We've been planning it for 2 years, so it's been a labor of love. But yeah, thank you.
Amazing.
Very cool.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, let's go back to Nastasia.
Thanks. Yeah, I just thought of another question for track one, which is prioritizing, addressing knowledge gaps that will help inform the future of the Protect 30 by 30 protection plan. And I'm wondering if you want those projects to be able to clearly identify an extra however many acres of, coastal area that should be protected. Should we be specifically trying to identify new areas that will be protected, or because these are sort of research projects, we would be sort of presenting the research outcomes without making specific recommendations?
I would be very interested in specific recommendations. So specific recommendations for how either existing area-based conservation could be strengthened. So for example, sanctuaries or water quality protected areas, additional things that those places could do for biodiversity, and or recommendations for new area-based designations that could conserve biodiversity. So one of the things, for example, that we've really been thinking a lot about is estuaries and the specific threats that estuary ecosystems face, especially relative to the open coast where stressors and threats are very different, right? And so new conservation measures, recommendations for new conservation measures that could better protect estuaries would be a really good example of a track one priority.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And other places too, not just estuaries, but using them as an example because they're definitely top of mind. Okay, I don't see other hands, so I'm gonna skim through the chat. Jen, thank you so much for handling chat questions.
I think I got everything in the chat, but if I missed your question, please raise your hand. I don't. There was a comment. I'll just flag for the group. There was a comment about or a request that we capture all the feedback in the chat and the discussion and post it publicly. So we'll pull together an FAQ that summarizes kind of the great set of questions you've all shared with us and our answers. And that can kind of be a living document as things continue to come up as we move through this process. Michaela, I see your hand up. Let me see if I can unmute. Oh, I accidentally muted you in my attempt to unmute you. Go ahead.
No worries. So, Mike, you mentioned the sanctuaries, and just to clarify, are you guys interested in work that takes place in the California National Marine Sanctuaries, or is that federal?
You got it.
Sorry, I just jumped in. In the state waters portion of sanctuaries, absolutely.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? These have been great. Yeah, I love the idea of developing an FAQ and keeping it updated. Not seeing any additional questions in chat.
Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time. This has been really great attendance, very thoughtful questions. And we're excited to see what comes in.
Thank you.
Do you want to share? We do have office hours. Maybe we want to drop that.
Yeah, let me put that link in the chat really quick. All of the links to things like LOI template and everything, that's all going to be in the link to the full solicitation that I put in the chat. And then here I will drop the office hour registration as well. So please don't hesitate to join us on July 9th for office hours. And not seeing any additional questions, Jen, I think we can wrap up, yeah?
Sounds great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.